For the first time ever, the Kingdom of Vortia experienced 100 years of peace. With the rising tensions between King Banta and King Vortide, will it stay this way though? Find out today as I play 700 years of kingdoms and castles. If you haven't seen the previous videos, check them out before this one. Link down below. Every single year that passed made me think about King Banta's betrayal. There was only one thing on my mind, and that was revenge. However, I wasn't gonna rush into anything. If I had learned anything from my war with Queen Mazenberger, it was to take a calculated and prepared approach towards war rather than rushing into it. And that is exactly what I planned to do. I wanted to build up my defenses and raise a huge army before invasion. That way, I could take out King Banta and his forces within a single year. Well, looks like it's time to get to it. And of course, upgrading my infrastructure along the way too. It's almost like these Vikings know exactly how to annoy me. Whenever I start big projects around the kingdom, they always seem to invade. It's almost like there's a traitor among us. That can't be it. It must be King Banta. There's not even any Vikings attacking his island right now. They only came to mine. There were also quite a lot of Vikings. They were attacking my weakest points of the castles, almost like they had been given information of where they were. After fending off all of those Vikings, I had spotted an area in Greater Vortia that seemed super inefficient. So of course, I had all of the buildings removed, and then I created a little housing area that just made a lot more sense. It also would increase happiness as well as increase the population so we could train more soldiers and fill more jobs. Towards the back of the subdivision was a little iron source. I had built some docks and planned on expanding the walls so that way I could build a pretty large iron mine and start extracting iron. Well, that's going to be a tight squeeze, but it works. While expanding my walls onto the docks, I had noticed that the devil himself was reaching out. No, I'm kidding. It's just King Banta. He had gotten upset that I had taken so long to answer his diplomat, and then he proceeded to ask me for resources to build a blacksmith. Of course, he was asking for more stuff, even after his nasty betrayal. I told him yes, I would be willing to help out, because I didn't want him to think anything was up. If he even had the slightest idea of what I was planning, then he would probably prepare all of his troops and make 1,000,000 more towers. It was time to recall one of my diplomats who was hanging out on King Banta's island. This diplomat happened to be named Sir Moose. I had told him to go pick up the materials that were being prepared at the Hall of Diplomacy. Soon after, I realized that I could finally place down my iron mine. I unfortunately had to destroy some of the road just so I could place it, but it honestly looked pretty good there. And I was going to be getting a lot of iron from it, so why not? I then placed down a large tavern next to the iron mine, as well as a couple apple tree farms next to all the houses. This was pretty nice because it allowed the citizens to be able to walk out their front door and pick some apples to eat. King Banta's not going to be getting through these defenses. These are some peaceful walls for peaceful times. Even though it seemed overkill to keep building up more walls on that side of the castle, King Banta would be striking from there. And my whole thought process was, if that's where the enemy troops are going to be coming from, why would I not have a bunch of ballistas to take out the boats before they even land? Honestly, I wonder what King Banta's thinking. I'm over here planning an invasion on his castle, and I wonder if he's doing the same to mine. While I was lost in my thoughts, a dragon had started attacking one of my ballista towers. It took it out completely, but we took care of the dragon completely. As the new neighborhood in Greater Vortia had finished constructing, I decided it was time to place down some more food production areas next to it. This was honestly the most ideal place to put down some farms. The reason being is that there were 2 neighborhoods that surrounded it, so all of the people could get their food from there, as well as there was a theater adjacent to it. And everybody knows whenever you go to the theater, you're going to want to have snacks there. So having farms right next to it is ideal. Geez, it feels like there's always just a Viking invasion going on. It wasn't even that many years since the last one. At least it felt that way. This time though, it looked like the Vikings had come prepared. One of my gates was already almost destroyed, and the Vikings had just landed. Real quick, if you're enjoying the content, go ahead and subscribe for more. The first wall has been breached! All my archers were raining down arrows at the enemies who made it in to the first layer of my castle. My knights even made their way out to start fighting off the giant ogres so they weren't able to do too much damage to my inner walls. Right as I started rebuilding, more enemies had landed. Thankfully, there weren't too many of them, and my archers and towers were able to take them out pretty quickly. Meanwhile, in Greater Vortia, it seemed like the Vikings were just landing. The wall on this island wasn't as big as the one back on Vortia, so I had a lot more concern for this island's protection than Vortia's. It seemed like there weren't too many Vikings, only 4 units to be exact, so I was able to relax a little bit. After the Viking invasion, I realized that I needed to fortify some of my outer walls on Vortia and just my walls in general on Greater Vortia. So that's exactly what I started to plan out. I wanted to wall off the weak spots first. So, I started walling off the areas that I know the Vikings usually like to invade at. I then started walling off the last gap on Greater Vortia. I had a bathhouse placed in the most inconvenient spot possible. I couldn't place any walls there, so I ended up destroying it, and destroying some of the pathing too. I figured while I was remodeling, I might as well place the new dock location as well. This was then followed up by the placement of walls to create the new entrance to Greater Vortia. Well, look who it is. King Banta had sent over some diplomats. I tried to be courteous and offer them some bread. Of course, they ate it and then complained about it. This was incredibly insulting, as I had given them free food, and they were gonna just eat it and complain? King Banta had then even gotten more mad. He said that he had been waiting way too long for the gift that I was preparing for him. This was unfortunate because I honestly did forget to send it over. It was prepared and everything. Well, since I ended up making it for him, I might as well send it over to his kingdom anyways. So that's exactly what I did. Before his diplomat even made it back to their castle, I had my diplomat drop off the gift. It seemed to make him a little bit happier, and it increased our relationship by very little. Well, since all that diplomacy is done, time to get back to making more defenses. I ended up placing down 2 Greek fire encampments right at the front gate of Vortia. I purposely planned on making this area a little bit weaker with walls, so that way the Vikings would always attack here. Having the 2 fire encampments paired with the ballistas and archer towers was going to be way too overpowered. So, all the Vikings would funnel into this little area on my island, and then the defenses would take them out instantly. Since I had recently destroyed a bathhouse in Greater Vortia, it seemed like my citizens wanted it replaced. That was very fair. So I started planning out where I could build another one. Sweet, another Viking invasion. I was honestly excited for this invasion, as I was able to see my Greek fire encampments be put to use. They instantly melted the 2 ogres that had landed on the dock and tried to attack my walls. I think they were killed in less than 3 seconds. Now that's what I call a good defense. Unfortunately, it felt like they were taking forever to recharge though. Honestly, that cooldown time is pretty brutal. I also got to see quite a lot of Vikings heading towards King Banta's island. Oh wait, they're not going for King Banta's island, they're going for mine. Uh-oh. 9 different ships had started to approach my new entrance on Greater Vortia. There was no way it was going to last, and my walls were already crumbling before all of the enemies made it onto the dock. So I started sending over the only troops that I had on the island to go and help defend. I also tried rebuilding the walls as quickly as possible. Surprisingly enough, my citizens had quickly started repairing, and as the enemies broke down walls, more were built. This stopped the enemies in their tracks, and my archer towers and ballistas were able to take them out. That one really tall ballista on Vortia was even able to get a couple shots off. And now, this Greek fire encampment is definitely going to make things a little bit easier. In efforts to keep King Banta from being suspicious, I ended up promising him that I would help out with the next Viking invasion. This should keep him at bay and prevent him from declaring war on me, as well as make him think that I'm not going to declare war on him. After schmoozing King Banta, I fortified my walls a little bit more and then expanded my graveyard. It was already halfway full, so it made sense to make it bigger. I had also found a new area to place down a Noria, moat, and bathhouse. This way, I didn't have to have my walls exposed because I wanted a Noria in the actual ocean. Having one in the moat was sufficient enough. While looking for ways to improve my islands, I had noticed that I had underutilized some farmland that I could fit 2 more apple farms on. I just had to move things around. I then started placing taverns all throughout the island of Vortia because the citizens were complaining that there weren't enough. I ended up placing down 2 more taverns, which was more than what they were asking for. This should keep everyone happy, hopefully. I had then received word that there was going to be a Viking invasion in the next couple of years. It also had been a long time since the last one, so it just made sense. I ended up placing down a whole bunch of archer towers as there were so many different areas on the walls that didn't have protection. Well, now they do. The Vikings had made their way over to my islands as the invasion began. It seemed like there was way less Vikings attacking Vortia than the last time. That meant Greater Vortia was definitely going to have a lot more fierce attackers. That definitely appeared to be the case. The nice thing was, they were all spread out though. So when the first enemy landed on my island, they were instantly melted. And that was when the rest of the Vikings started to land. The ships were going one by one, so as the enemies were docking, they got obliterated. Jeez, that Greek fire ballista is insane. After the Viking invasion was over, I started to create some destruction of my own. I ordered the gathering of a whole bunch of trees on one of the forests in Vortia. This way I could use the land to place down some more manors and grow my population. It was a little bit sad destroying all of these trees to build more houses, but it made sense because we needed to expand the kingdom. It was either trees or houses for people. Obviously, we're going to want to choose houses for people, especially considering there are a couple other forests on this island. Even though the happiness on Vortia wasn't 100%, I was pretty satisfied with how happy the people were. 79% wasn't bad at all, especially when we had a population of over 1,600 people. I then ended up building a couple more farms, 3 swine herds and a butcher on Greater Vortia because they didn't have any pork at all, and then I made King Banta happy by talking to him and promising him more troops for the next Viking invasion. Everything was going smoothly. Too smoothly. I had suspicions that something bad was about to happen. Even though there wasn't any signs of anything bad happening, it just felt that way because usually when we go for this long of a period of happiness and peace, it never stays like that. I wasn't going to take any chances with my suspicion, so I ended up going to the witch and paying her 1,800 gold to smite all of the Vikings that were trying to invade. They all instantly just sunk in their ships. Now that's pretty cool. There was one that survived, however. I don't know how, but I paid the witch quite a lot of gold for that, and she didn't complete her job fully. It's whatever though, at least I don't have to kill any Vikings. It was also pretty nice, because in the time that I would have been fighting off the Viking invaders, I was able to start building another little subdivision. This land is going to make a great addition to the kingdom. Oh, what a nice view. The former Vortian army was finally being restored to its former glory. There was an insane amount of troops being trained, and there was already a lot of swordsmen and archers who were prepared to board ships and go to war. The biggest thing we needed was more catapults. It was only a matter of time until I declared the manufacturing of all catapults top priority. So they started popping out of my training facilities like crazy. Let me just go ahead and throw down another ballista tower conveniently on this side. Not for any particular reason or anything, don't worry. We only need a few more troops and then we'll be ready. Wow, being a king can be so demanding. Sometimes you just gotta sit back and relax and watch your castles. You can even see all of the people down there, they look like little ants. As the last few years of preparations came to a close, I started loading all of my troops onto the ships. I wanted to keep each ship organized by unit type. This is the same strategy that I pulled off when I was fighting Queen Mazenberger. To me, it made a lot of sense to sort all of the ships this way, so that way I know when I need to deploy my catapults, archers, and knights onto the island. Ideally, we'd want to start off with the knights, then archers, and then catapults. Believe it or not, loading all of these troops into different ships and organizing them took a couple of years. That's how many troops we had, and more were still being produced. This was going to be an absolutely crazy invasion. Despite my efforts preparing for the war, a bunch of Vikings had made it onto my islands trying to distract me. You got lucky this time, Banta. Your kingdom gets to live for another couple years while I fight off these Vikings. I honestly was starting to believe the theory I had about the Vikings and King Banta being allied. The reason being is that this was a perfect distraction to prevent me from invading King Banta's kingdom. Very odd. Also, you could see all of the Viking ships are sailing past his kingdom right now. But they're not dropping off any troops, they're just returning back to where they came from. After that wild distraction, I had to continue loading all of my troops onto the ships. Thankfully, more had been trained in the time that we were fighting off the Vikings, so that meant that this invasion was going to be even bigger. The time had fallen upon us. The invasion was going to begin any second, as my troops sailed their way over to King Banta's island. If he didn't know about the war, he definitely knew it was coming now. Nothing is cooler than seeing the Vortian army make its way over to cause complete chaos and get their revenge. As my troops waited outside of King Banta's walls, I talked to him, giving him one last chance to make it up to me. I told him that he has to pay my kingdom a tribute in gold, and he wasn't very happy about that. He did, however, offer 14 gold. That's it. And then he rashly declared war on me after I told him that wasn't enough. This was his mistake, as I was already prepared for war. King Banta had immediately rushed his troops to the few ships that he had sitting outside of his castle walls. They started sailing directly over to my castle. They didn't even try to fight my troops that were waiting outside of his. It seemed like he was going to try and rush my walls and see if he could take them down before I could destroy his. That's not going to work out without any catapults, buddy. I was waiting out the rest of King Banta's troops. It seemed like he had only 5 more to send over, and once again, no catapults. Of course, right as I said that, a catapult on a ship had started making its way over. Oh, the irony. This wasn't going to be enough to do anything though. It was only one catapult. And of course, the ship that it was sailing on instantly got sunk as it sailed past my castle walls. I had then started to prepare all of my troops for the boarding process. The whole plan was to take down King Banta's walls and immediately go for his keep, trying to retain as much of the city that we could. It was now or never. I told all of my troops to land on the island and start attacking. Unfortunately, some of the ships started to clump up and they couldn't land the troops. I had also forgotten to prepare some of the ships to be able to land troops. This was incredibly annoying, but my soldiers that were on the island had started focusing the archer tower and ballista that was able to damage my troops. I ordered all of the ships that had already dropped off troops to move away from the island. That way, the ships that still had to unload could do it and not be blocked by the empty ones. Once all of the troops had made it onto the island, they started focusing 2 castle walls. This way, once they were destroyed, everyone else could pile in and start attacking the keep. Right before that though, I had sent some of my swordsmen to go and take care of a few of the ballistas that were posted up along the walls. I had then told my catapults and archers to start focusing on the keep. The catapults had finally made their way into the castle walls. Once they started pelting the keep with rocks, it went down very quickly. And that was the end of King Banta. I ended up exiling him from the land, and told him that he should have never betrayed me when he thought that him and Queen Mazenberger together could take me out. Bringing all of the new citizens, buildings, and materials into the kingdom had got Vortia recognized as a magnificent kingdom. It felt very weird because I was now the only king in all of these lands. The Kingdom of Vortia owned it all. And that's why I decided to refer to these 3 islands as the Islands of Vortia. As much as I wanted to celebrate, I had to recognize that I needed to stabilize the happiness on this new island. It was at around 64% happiness. This wasn't that good, and it was heading downward towards 57%. So I needed to do something fast to keep it from dropping even more. Right before I took action, I was talking to one of the knights named Sir Matthew. He suggested that I name the island the Isle of Vortia. I thought that was a very good name, and he fought valiantly in the war. So I named this new island the Isle of Vortia. I had also started to prepare a feast to feed to all of the new citizens and increase happiness, stabilizing the isle. Since King Banta practically had no defenses, that was the first thing on my priority list for the new island. The biggest issue that we have on our hands is that the Vikings could come in and start destroying any building that they want. The only area that's really walled off is the big feast house as well as the military buildings. So I placed some docks and planned on putting walls on top of those docks to wall off the entire island. It also just made sense to keep my islands over on the Isle of Vortia. That way, when these Vikings do come here, they'll be able to kill them off instead of having our buildings getting destroyed. This was a good replacement for the wall while we were waiting. It was also time to place down some more ballistas and archer towers. My troops could be a good distraction to the Vikings that make their way on over, while the towers pick them off. 3 dragons soared through the sky towards my island. Unfortunately, it looked like one giant red one was going towards the Isle of Vortia. As it passed through the main island, it had taken quite a lot of damage. Hopefully the Isle can finish it off. What the heck? It looks like the archer towers aren't even shooting at the dragon. What's going on? Luckily enough, the dragon wasn't hovering over the Isle for too long. It ended up going over to Greater Vortia where it was immediately killed. I had to figure out what was going on with my towers and ballistas. After talking to my advisors and doing some digging, I found out that King Banta had given an executive order to abandon the ballista towers and archer towers at the very last second. I'll give it to him. That is a pretty clever sabotage before being exiled. Thankfully, all 3 dragons didn't attack the Isle, otherwise, things could have gone south. Of course, I gave the executive order to continue manning the ballista towers as well as the archer towers. It wouldn't make sense to have nobody defending the castle when the Vikings invade in 1 year. It seemed like the people of the Isle weren't very happy. I talked to my advisors, and they had told me that we needed a graveyard. After that huge war, there wasn't a place to bury all of the people that had sadly passed away during it. The Viking invasion began. I focused on defending the Isle of Vortia because it had the least amount of defenses. It looked like the enemies were able to just breeze their way through all of the city. I had then sent over my troops to handle them. There even ended up being a pesky catapult that was taking advantage of the lack of defenses on my island. There was actually 2 of them to be exact. They were just sitting there taking out as many buildings as they could in an area where they couldn't get hit by any of my towers. It seemed like the Vikings actually did a significant amount of damage on all of my islands. So of course, I was inspired to continue further the progress in building up my walls. Each island was going to have a pretty strong and significant wall, so that way no enemies would even be able to attack it. They would just be taken out as they tried taking down the walls. It seemed like everyone was still pretty unhappy in the Isle of Vortia. The recent Viking invasions definitely caused a decent amount of that. So I placed down a bathhouse and then started expanding the walls even faster because I saw what happened in the last invasion, and that was on my main island. So I didn't know if I'd be able to even defend the isle if that many Vikings started to target it. I was receiving complaints that we needed more doctors on the isle. So I placed down 2 more clinics to keep everybody at full health. That was when, of course, we got to test out our new defenses. A dragon invasion was happening, and honestly, it didn't go so well. A black and orange dragon in particular was bullying a lot of the buildings. So, when it finally died, I had to replace a lot of the different archer towers across the island. The inevitable was happening. A Viking invasion. I really wasn't prepared for this one, and I didn't want the isle to get completely destroyed. It looked like a lot of the Vikings, though, were focusing on the main island of Vortia. Greater Vortia was also getting a pretty fierce attack, but it wasn't as bad. Thankfully, the isle was able to survive, and it didn't have too many invaders, so we really did luck out. Time started to really fly by, and now started to feel like I was kind of just preparing for the next Viking invasions. That was because the Vikings were now sending huge waves of enemies, and it seemed like they were focusing in on a single island a lot more than they used to. All it would take is a concentrated attack on the Isle of Vortia. If the Vikings just did that, they could honestly level the whole island pretty quickly. My defenses wouldn't be enough to handle the sheer number of enemy units that would be on the island. King Banta, what were you thinking with all of these Norias right next to each other? For once, in my 689 years of ruling this kingdom, I honestly wasn't sure if I was going to be able to fight off the Viking invasion, depending on where they attack. Let the games begin. A huge swarm of Vikings made their way over to the main island of Vortia. They were attacking at the back gate, and they made it through very quickly. I even started training some troops just in case I needed to send them over to that back gate. It seemed like there were a lot of ogres, and that's how they made it through the castle walls so quickly. They started making their way towards my main base, and then I went to go check on the isle just to make sure everything was going smoothly. Greater Vortia was holding off pretty well, but it did look like there was more enemies heading towards it. And sure enough, right when I thought things were done on Vortia, a whole bunch more ogres started landing and taking out the walls. They were only just being rebuilt, so they weren't that powerful, and the ogres took them out pretty quickly. Thankfully, my defenses were prepared, and they didn't make it too far into my kingdom again. That last invasion really made me realize that I needed to step up my defenses, and I needed to do it quickly. The Vikings had attacked my main castle, not even with all of their forces, and they were able to make it into the walls. This was pretty concerning, as this was my best defended castle, and the Vikings were able to make it pretty far. So what did that mean for the Isle of Vortia? It was the newest addition to the kingdom, but that also meant that it was the most vulnerable. Even though we had just conquered all 3 islands, things weren't going to be as easy as they seem. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done.